All right, hi again, everybody. This is our panel on development, which I previewed a little bit in the last panel. We had Richard Coles on before, but Nathan actually does bigger projects than he does, so it'd be good to talk to these guys. The big question today is tariffs, and what we're hearing from developers today is like they're not too worried about them. Projects are still going to go forward, or is it too early to say? We're hearing about shipping containers from China coming here empty. So we really want to dissect that today. We're also going to look a little bit at some of the city and state incentives that have come down in the last year, and they all have 400, 500, all these annoying acronyms, but they seem to actually be making a difference today, even if they're not perfect. So I want to talk about that. We got a great group. We've got Jonathan Landau, who was at Fortis Property Group for many years, built one of the most buzzed about projects in Brooklyn, Olympia Dumbo, went on his own, doing projects in Miami. He's got the third biggest building in Brooklyn coming up, which we'll hear more about. We've got MaryAnne Gilmartin, another big Brooklyn project. She worked at Forest City Ratner's, Atlantic Yards, you might have heard of it. And then she went out on her own too, and has about 1,000 units between Chelsea and Midtown East, doing a $1 billion project in Baltimore as well, so some good perspective on the market there. And then Nathan Berman, who has been the pioneer, really, of the office to resi conversion in New York City, applied his trade back in the 90s and early 2000s in Lower Manhattan, and then COVID hit, and he became a very, very busy man again. And his biggest project right now is the Pfizer building conversion, 1,600 units, biggest office to resi conversion in the history of the country. So, we'll talk a little bit about that today. But the first question I want to ask you guys is, the impact of tariffs. Like, is that something that could drive up building costs, and what are you actually seeing on the ground so far? Jonathan or Nathan, how about, conversions? It's like you already have an existing structure there. How much added cost are you looking at?
Fortunately, labor is the largest cost for our conversions. So, and we buy a lot of things locally anyway. So overall, the tariffs will be an insignificant blip. The project is a $1 billion plus overall cost. And it's going to be an insignificant percentage if the tariffs do hit.
And that's even if a July 9th happens.
Correct.
And it's full tariffs and all that?
Correct.
Got it.
So I might say that we have picked apart the building, with the buildings we've built and the ones we're planning to build, and gone deep on all the detail with the construction managers and the experts in the industry. We know, for example, that with steel and aluminum, which is largely going to be subject to 10 to 25% tariffs. When we extrude that through a pro forma and we look at the building trades, because of what Nathan said about labor being a large percentage of the costs, and then the other items that make up a ground-up residential building, we know that it's 2% roughly of the total project cost.
Got it.
Most of us carry 10% contingency, and so we've come to the conclusion that we don't really know what's going to happen. If it does happen, it won't sink us in a way that will make these buildings unbuildable.
That's encouraging. And Jonathan, what you mentioned before was, hire a good lawyer. Like, how does that tie in? What can you do to kind of, adjust your way around or navigate some of these tariffs?
Well, I think that one of the points that is important to understand is we do have a lot of finishes that come from Europe or even stone that's fabricated in Europe or China. And if you think about it, it travels from Italy sometimes to China to be fabricated to the United States, or windows that come from South America and then they get finished in the United States. The tariff laws have specific provisions for what work has to be done in specific countries for tariffs to be applicable. And you want to be very careful because it's not a place you want to sort of, mess around with. But there are ways where you can go to vendors and say, I don't care if you want to source the stone somewhere, but fabricate it here so that it's not subject to the tariffs. They can figure it out, make sure that you're not crossing any red lines, but there are ways around it. At the end of the day, I think what Nathan and MaryAnne are saying is the bottom line. It's not a big deal to us right now. If it sustains over time and for whatever reason, the tariffs on Europe and South America are increased, that could be a point that you'd need to discuss. But right now, the Chinese tariffs, as far as I'm concerned, are not having a big impact.
Right. You also said you're going to your vendors and saying, hey, get it here by July 9th or it's your problem, right?
Right. To a certain extent, you really need to understand anybody you do business with, if they're not making money, it's not good for you at the end of the day. It's tough. So you need to tell them they got to absorb whatever they can. Their spreads, they can go back to their sources and try to skinny down a little bit on their costs. And right now it's working, but obviously not with 135% in China.
Yeah.
If I might say also about the demand or the lack of supply and a supply chain for business for contractors, like there's always this notion of offsets. Maybe it's the eternal optimism of a developer, but what we believe is certainly in the dirty trades like excavation, foundation work, just because a lot of the work that you're doing, we're seeing trades come to us and say, what's your pipeline? And when that starts to happen, we don't know what construction costs are going to be when we buy a job.
Right.
When the competition gets fierce and there are more bidders for jobs, the pricing is more levelized. And so I think the trade-off to tariffs might be that there are a lot of hungry contractors out there. There are certain trades for which you're not going to see a robust pipeline of work, and that benefits builders and developers like us.
Right. So you get that negotiability there. And Jonathan, you mentioned, and I think this is pretty interesting, this legitimately might be an opportunity to do more manufacturing in the U.S. And you gave an example of, you go to a factory in South America for your glass stuff. If you put in an order, somebody came to you about a company in Miami that was starting up. Do you want to describe what that situation was?
So, the intended purpose of the tariffs, my name is not Donald J. Landau, it's Jonathan Landau, but I think if I could speak for him, it's obviously to bring more, more work here in the United States, whether it's a matter of finishing or it's a matter of production or it's a matter of, new industries. The point is we want more U.S. domesticated product. We're looking for that right now as a result of a potential tariff threat. We're saying, I spoke to my general contractor. He's like, listen, here are the 10 line items that you can buy in the U.S. that you're not. Go look there. One of those, I would call it line items, was windows. We got a phone call from a fabricator that was setting up shop in Miami. I went to look at their factory. There were probably about 30 or 40 people there, 2 pieces of machinery that were pretty sophisticated machinery, but they were literally hand building curtain wall and window wall for buildings. And I'm like, well, what's your capacity? How can you actually accommodate a large project? And they said, we need orders. If you give us orders, we can get financing for the equipment and we can produce at high volumes. And they're willing literally to get orders at very small profit margins so that they can actually build these factories and these plants. It's happening within a month after the tariffs were announced. So we see that going into place. Would I want to be the guinea pig to buy a stick-built window system? Maybe not. But if I was ensured that there was going to be all of the technology that's put into place in all of the factories abroad, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. And you think, so if you put in a $50 million order for a glass manufacturer in Miami and they scale up, is that, a turnaround time of a year or two to... what turnaround time for some of this domestic manufacturing?
If you think about it,
stuff?
I've designed a building 2 years ago that I'm going to start construction on in 3 months, and I don't need windows there for another 15 months. So,
right.
If you're in the beginning of your design development process and you know what the product is and you can do some kind of design build in the process, you can have 2 to 3 years of a run-up before you need the product. You just need to make sure that one of the worst things, and I guess my co-panelists can tell you, if you're in the middle of a project and you need your windows delivered, you can't switch and say, oh, let me buy that from some other vendor. You got to actually have the capacity to run the production and the specifications for the project. Right.
But real estate, often has that decent lead time to do something like this, it seems like.
That's correct.
That's interesting. Well, I want to touch on, some of the city and state incentives. I mean, I think you guys will agree. I want to hear from you that, what happened in the last year, you guys are using some of the stuff that the city and state passed. Nathan, I think you never used any sort of incentives before in any of your projects. And along comes the 467M, which requires you to have a quarter of your building affordable. But I think you were saying you wouldn't have done the Pfizer building without that.
Well, I have always been a proponent of market rate forever, partly because I guess no program was available for conversions previously. But I have to say that the combination of the City of Yes and the 467M incentive, I think that it probably quadrupled the viability of conversions in the city. Going forward, we now are taking advantage of 467M in all of our projects going forward.
Wow.
The city did something, we were sort of talking about this before in a backstage. The city hit the bullseye with this combination of incentives, especially for conversions.
It had to be accidental.
I think I may have been by accident,
Right.
unfortunately, but
Right.
listen, but we're happy to have what we have.
Does it create any problems later when you go to sell a building and it's got, with this 30-year tax abatement?
Ask me that question in 35 years.
Yeah.
When
worry
it is, the 25% affordable is permanently affordable, and I guess no one has yet explained what permanently affordable means, but we'll see as I said, in 3.5 decades what that ultimately means.
But you might sell it before that. Like, what's your typical exit for these
Well,
projects?
because of this incentive, obviously, it's best to sell as much of an abatement time as you can. So we are very likely to sell most of these projects at completion.
I can tell you from experience, when there were other incentive programs that had 10 or 15 years of a lifespan for the tax abatement, when you got to the end of it, the buyers were doing a discounted cash flow, and they were not valuing on the typical cap rate basis. So Nathan would be very wise, in my opinion, to sell right away.
Yeah. And Jonathan, you were saying any sort of tax abatement, you just don't like it as a matter of principle. It's like financial engineering, kind of like a BS way of doing a project, or it just doesn't appeal to you, like philosophically or economically, I
So,
suppose.
first of all, as a matter of principle, is not a term I would like to use in public because it usually means you're not right. But I used to be a tax lawyer, and we would get deals that had all kinds of tax credits or tax incentives to analyze. Fundamentally, most of those deals didn't work without them. And so you're basically undertaking a deal that doesn't work if you use one of these programs. Now, I'm not saying in Nathan's case it's not the right way to do it, and factually speaking, there's all other ways to subsidize something that doesn't work. If you took the numbers on a straight-up multifamily project at the highest rents that you could reasonably project, call it $70 net, which, by the way, is $120 of rent, $15 to $20 of operating expenses, and then $30 of taxes. If you're lucky to only have $30 of taxes. That gives you $70. Throw a 5 cap on that. The top end value is $1,400 a foot. Okay? Now, take your costs to build a building, probably $500 in hard costs. Some people might say that's low, some people might say that's high. $300 for land cost, maybe $350. Between soft costs and hard costs, you're easily at another $250. That means the maximum you could make on this project is somewhere after sales costs $350 out of $1,400. That's lower as a profit percentage than most business people would want to pursue. But the fact is, that's without any subsidy, full market rate. So how do you do that? You have to have some subsidy. Sometimes you use a tax program. Sometimes you might have a mixed-use project that you can subsidize your cost of your multifamily with, say, condo proceeds or retail proceeds or something like that. The fact is, we're all having to deal with somehow engineering it. I just rather not work with a tax program to do it, because think about the question you posed. What's the value in 10 years from now?
Right. I guess that carries weight since you're a former tax lawyer. MaryAnne, I want to talk about some of the incentives you're using. 485X is a big one. That's the one that gets a knock because while it seems like people are using it, you're really capped out at 100 units, because after 100 units, then it changes, the wages you're paying. So how are you kind of navigating that? Are you looking at doing these 99, 100 unit buildings throughout the city, or what's kind of your approach?
So our business thesis going forward is really framed around the new 485X program. I've lived through the 421A versions. They just kept getting worse and worse and more dilutive to the returns. But there isn't a way, in my view, to stand up luxury rental housing in this city because of the taxes unless you're doing an allocation, which I think condos really are the great allocator of high land costs. So at Atlantic Yards Pacific Park, it was easy because you just push different land values on the condo buildings, or if it's a mixed-use building, the condos can carry the subsidy for the multifamily. But I believe that an interesting city, a great city where people want to be, needs to have rental housing, and I think it needs to have housing at all different levels of affordability. So I'm a big believer in the program. I think it's anemic. It really has been a bit of a buzzkill for those of us that believe that in a city that could use 500,000 units of affordable housing, that is not going to happen. And so it's terribly disappointing that nothing of scale on the rental front will get built in this 10-year period if this program doesn't get re-engineered.
Right.
So instead, we're the little engine that could. I'm a 35-year-old startup. So we just looked at the company and said, we're 30 people. We're going to chase 149 units or less. It turns out that the difference between the 99 units and the 149, sometimes the trade-off is there to go up to 149. The wage burden gets greater, but the efficiencies of building these small buildings really suffer.
Right.
So I have an entire pipeline of $1 billion project cost, total project cost, that is framed around sites that will benefit from 149 units or less. Now, inside of that is another thesis, which is that this city needs to build larger units for families and given the concentration of wealth in our city, which is greater than it ever has been, there is a desire to have luxury units where you have more space. We're all in the hospitality business, more amenities, and I think to keep families in this city, there are 20% less young children living in the city today than there was in 2020. So I believe in creating places for families, people who are wealthy that want to be nimble and want optionality. There's a deep market for rental housing in this city. So 485X, it's the best we've got.
Yeah.
And by the way, that is the state, I should point out.
Yeah, that's
the city of yes is the city. And I always say, why do we need a city of yes program? Is because we were the city of no. The answer is always no. And when you do business in other cities, you realize how cathartic it is to get outside New York, where development is actually embraced as a way to improve a city, to create possibility, to create opportunities for people, not the scourge of the business community, which for a long time, really before Mayor Adams, the industry suffered from a reputation problem. So City of Yes is amazing. It's one of the most consequential pieces of rezoning and legislation that have been done at the city level in the history of my being in this business. So embrace it, celebrate it, marry it with 485X, and you've got a business.
Right. So I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but that means you're voting for Mayor Adams' re-election? No, some of you guys donated to Cuomo. I won't say which, but
You know what we do? We all stay agnostic. We support the community of candidates.
Yeah.
We have personal views, but I'd say we need a high-performing mayor in this city.
What a lot of developers do, what a lot of people in real estate do, is donate to more than one candidate as well to hedge their bets, of course. But I wanted to follow up on one of the pieces of the City of Yes, air rights. That seems like it's more, less restrictive. And one commercial broker, I was just talking to, he's doing like 17 air rights deals this month. His record in the past was 3 air rights deals. Like, are you guys looking at air rights stuff? Midtown South seems like a ripe area for that, and you do a lot of projects there.
We're always looking to aggregate the air rights. It's dollar cost averaging. The air rights are typically not valued at the same price as the land. So I do think it creates more speed to create the result of the housing or the commercial space.
Yeah.
If you think about it, you get an incentive to build small buildings, but then you make air rights available. That makes a lot of sense.
It is an inherent contradiction.
Yeah.
But I will say this, there's other benefits to City of Yes that were probably unintended. There's mechanical deductions which enhance your net sellable square footage or rentable square footage.
Removal of the parking, right? Who needed parking in a transit-oriented city? Like we had ridiculous parking requirements in places like Brooklyn and central business districts. It's great to have those lifted and lessened.
Right. And the other thing I would say, which I think is important, is You talk about the mayor. Are we supporting him? It's not just the mayor. It's his entire team. He might be amazing, but who's standing behind him may be scary. So, what we really need is we need the real estate industry to get together and to support real estate taxes that are predictable, to make sure that they're not stripping the developability out of real estate, because we need places to live and it's not affordable right now.
Yeah. And what are your opinions on that? Because I think, the real estate lobby has been pretty weak in the last couple years, and it hasn't really figured out how to navigate the new world order with social media, and it's just kind of this backroom mentality that worked 30 years ago. But do you see a path forward with that, or anything that excites you?
I'm not political. I just know something needs to be done.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
By the way, just to finish off on the City of Yes, the program, as far as conversions are concerned, has created more FAR in buildings that are already overbuilt than I can physically add to that particular site. So it's too cost prohibitive to be adding that much FAR to some of these buildings. But City of Yes for conversions is a godsend. Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe you can do 99 unit buildings with 35-foot ceilings,
Well, the good
They
news.
restrict how many feet you could make your lower floors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the good news is that the 467M doesn't have the restrictions on prevailing wage, and so we have a complete carte blanche.
Yeah.
So,
Jonathan, tell us about your project in Brooklyn Heights. It's 47 stories. What are you thinking? Rental, condo? Or are you still too early?
We're going to have parking, even though it's not required. A lot of parking. We're going to have 90 multifamily units, a sports membership club and restaurant, and then 46 really large condos for families. 2,500 is, I think, our smallest unit in that building, and it goes up to 6,500 square feet. So we're really delivering homes for the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood instead of having to live in an old townhouse, which might be beautiful. You can live in a beautiful new condos with amenities, with parking. And the multifamily, I think the views, the outdoor space that we're creating there are going to be special.
That's cool. And MaryAnne, you're doing some projects that are both market rate and affordable. We talked mostly about the city stuff so far and state stuff. Anything at the federal level that's affecting what you're doing these days, or just actually in general for all you guys, whether it's immigration and construction sites or some of the HUD cutbacks, any of that stuff affecting you guys on the ground?
I think I'll just start by saying this is the first time that I've noticed that every mayoral candidate is supportive of creating more housing. And as long as I've been doing this, there was, the anti-housing, the pro-housing. And I think it really is that there is a mandate now to create more housing for the life of the city, and that's a new thing. I think there was a lot of hope that the feds might actually do something by way of programs, which we've really never relied upon. I'm not holding out a lot of hope for that, so I think we don't expect a lot out of the feds. What I can tell you is that we have been building all-electric buildings. We've been working on clean and green. We have a passive house building on 8th Avenue and 26th Street called Mabel. Very proud of that building. What I sit here and wonder is, are we swinging back the other way? We're going to bring back fossil fuels and gas, right. And is it really going to be necessary for cities to adhere to sustainable energy policies? Because they were required, and most of the times in our industry, we don't do things unless it's required of us, and that's how the change really happens. And I just wonder, given what's going on in D.C., is there going to be a flip-flop on that, and are we going to go into a deregulation mode? And then we as builders have to say, okay, it might last for 4 years, but what happens 5 years, 6 years down the road?
Yeah, so it could swing too far in the other direction. I mean, I think one of the interesting inflection points was, obviously Republicans are more pro-building, but the far left, during the election cycle, when Kamala Harris was like, let's build 1 million homes, and AOC was publishing op-eds in the New York Times saying we need to build more, suddenly the far left kind of got on the building train, and then now there hasn't really been as much opposition, which has been great.
Well, one of the things is, if you want to build more, you can't make the building code restrictive there are cities where you could build more efficiently because the building codes aren't that, let's call it, onerous. The issue that I've seen from a federal level is really more on coolant. So we do VRF, air-cooled VRF systems, and they change the coolants in there because of environmental requirements, and nobody knows what that means at the local state levels. There needs to be a better coordination between federal and state on regulating these things because it makes it very difficult to anticipate what you can and can't do in the field.
And it doesn't seem like that cooperation or oversight will be likely to improve, I would guess. I think it's just going to be, a deregulated environment.
Just deal with it as it comes.
Well, it's been good that we've seen so many office conversions because, at first, post-COVID, they were the silver bullet that was going to transform everything. And then it was like, nobody can do any of these. And now we're seeing a good number. How much room is left to run? Like, do you think you're going to spend the next 2 or 3 years acquiring new sites? And is there an oversupply at some point?
I don't believe that there will be oversupply at any time soon because the city is under-delivering market rate units now for several decades. I think the statistic is the city needs like 500,000 units by 2030, and we are delivering an average of, I think, 10 to 15,000 a year. So we're under-delivering. The market has never been as strong. I think in terms of what is possible going forward, I think the city probably has 30 or 40, maybe 50 million feet of space that is in need of repurposing.
Yeah.
And clearly going resi is the smartest solution.
And that's a pretty big deal because that was the dream at the beginning of COVID, is like we can solve some of this housing supply issue, and it's actually on the way to happening, right?
Absolutely. It's we alone are delivering between what is being delivered now and in the next 30 months, we're delivering over 5,000 units.
Wow.
Just ourselves.
Wow.
And there are limitless opportunities going forward, frankly.
Yeah, it's something like half the rental pipeline now is conversions. That'll probably be even higher at some point, right?
I think so. I think that 467M has made a lot of these projects viable, or a lot more viable than they were before. And we see the immediacy of a conversion is amazing. You have an office building sitting there half empty, and 18 months later you're collecting residential rent. It's, my head is off to ground up developers because that to me is like rocket science. We start with a building standing there. And
when you think about what Nathan's doing, though, and you think about this program, 485X, he has a clear runway to build at scale. And what we're going to do is eke out 99 units, 149 units. The 480 units that we built at Ruby across from FIT just simply mathematically would not work, would not attract investors. It's just simply not viable under 485X. So I do think that this idea that we have a housing emergency as defined as any vacancy rate of 3% or less. We're at 1.7%. We're a long way away from having too much housing.
Right.
And unfortunately, the ground up business is really hampered by this program.
Yeah.
I would say one other point that I think is responsive. If you think about it, my first projects in New York City came after the 2008 recession. From 2008 to 2011 or 12, nothing was built. I built a nice, but I wouldn't call it luxurious project on the west side. We absorbed 120 units in 6 months, okay? Reality didn't even begin to register. It was just, there was no other place, there was no other product. I heard about another project on the west side. I'm not going to mention it. It's not my project to mention. They opened up with $500 million of sales in their first 30 days because there is no other product. I'm not telling you all to go out there and compete with me, but what I am saying, it's a damn good time to be building in New York City, both from a rental side, because as you said, rental rates are as strong as they've ever been, and from a condo perspective, because there's no competitive product.
Yeah. And it looks like, Nathan, you got into some deals at a 3%. interest rate, and then it went up to 6, and those buildings didn't work out as well. But now that you're at a stable 6, I mean, you're just kind of
We are. Look, rates are a little bit higher than we'd like them to be, but so are the rents. And there's distress in the office market for us. We're buying things at 60% discount to what we used to pay 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Well, they say the hardest thing about conversions is you never know what you're going to find behind that wall. What's the weirdest thing you've ever found behind that wall?
You know, we've been very fortunate to never have come across anything. I mean, we'd see some columns that do not belong there or are not shown on any plan, but our conversions are all sort of complete gut renovations. So we are considering everything being scraped anyway. So
No bodies or
No Jimmy
treasure
Hoffa.
chests
You
or
didn't find Jimmy Hoffa.
no Jimmy Hoffa. Unfortunately, no bodies. So
That's
far.
good. That's good. Well, we're going to end it there, but I want to thank these guys for coming on stage today, and thanks for everybody in the audience, and stay tuned for our next panel.